Number two, you can be generous with affection. Generous with affection. If you study the life of Jesus, the word touch is an interesting word to trace in the Gospels because Jesus would touch. He would touch those he healed. He would touch those he prayed for. My favorite example is Luke 5, where Jesus touches the leper that he heals. Didn't have to. He could have spoken healing over the leper, but he touches the leper who had not been touched, and who knows how long. Jesus recognizes this, and he doesn't just heal him, but he touches him. There's something powerful about this physical touch, about affection. Now, next week, we're going to talk about sexual intimacy, and certainly that's part of being emotionally generous in marriage. But I just want to, for this conversation, talk about the non-sexual affection. Right, like it's holding hands while going for a walk. It is playing footsie under the table, which I'd be much more likely to do if it wasn't called footsie. Like if it was like foot wrestling, I'll foot wrestle with you. I'm not gonna play footsie with you, right? Like, and if I did, I wouldn't tell you about it. Like but it's that type of thing. It's a back rub before bed. It's a hug goodbye. It's a welcome home kiss. So some research that I found really helpful. I want you to lean in on this because it's simple but has, I think, profound opportunity. Dr. Linda Duncan, a marriage researcher, makes the case that it's not just how much affection you show, but it's when you show affection that can bond you to your spouse. It's not just how much, but it's when. And she shares that couples that have intimate, close relationships are generous with affection at 4 distinct points throughout their day. When they wake up, before leaving for the day, when they reconnect after work or school, haven't seen each other, they reconnect. And number 4, when they go to bed at night. Those 4 windows, she says, have unique opportunities where you can get a lot back for a little investment. When you wake up, before you leave for the day, when you connect after school or work, and as you go to bed at night. It doesn't have to be a lot. She makes the case that 30 seconds in each one of those windows can really change the intimacy in your marriage. Like 2 minutes total, 30 seconds at each time where you're just intentional in that window to be affectionate. And I can tell you how true this is for me as a husband. When I come home and I haven't seen my wife all day, and when I come home and she smiles at me and she comes and she gives me a hug, or she comes home and first time I see her, she gives me a hug and she just hangs on for a second. It changes. My heart fills up, my tank makes a huge difference, right? 30 seconds, but the time when she expressed that, when she was generous with affection, moves the needle. Research also suggests that a 20-second kiss every day can have a profound impact on the intimacy, the closeness of a married couple. Apparently, a kiss that's somewhere around the 20-second mark, your brain releases chemicals that deepens your connection to your spouse, somewhere around 20 seconds. I was sharing this with some of the staff this week, and one of them said, "Well, what kind of kiss?" I'm like, I don't know. There's no diagrams. Like, I don't think it's like I don't think that's it. I don't think you're getting a lot of chemicals that way. But there's something about 20 seconds of that kind of affection. God's designed us so that this bonding can take place. Number 3 is generous with appreciation. Paul says in Ephesians 5 that we should essentially have this filter on our mouths that cause us to only speak that which is helpful for building people up. 1 Thessalonians 5:11, encourage one another and build each other up. I think it's especially difficult to do that in marriage. And here's why. It's because over time we begin to take things for granted that other people might see in them, recognize pretty clearly, but we've just seen it enough that we don't even notice. And so for you, maybe your husband has always done a good job of cleaning up after himself. It's just always been that way. You don't think anything of it. I mean, he's a grown adult. Shouldn't he clean up after himself? Or maybe your wife's always been thoughtful on special occasions. Like she knows how to make a special day, but she's always done that. So now she does it and you don't really notice. Doesn't really stand out to you. Or maybe your husband has always been generous with other people. Like that's just part of who he is. He's generous with his time and money, and you don't think much of it because that's just the kind of guy he's always been. Or maybe your wife's always just been patient, just always patient. And you don't pay much attention because she's always been that way. And so it can be difficult to be generous with appreciation because of our tendency to take things for granted, and yet the opposite ends up being true, that we have a way of noticing all the other stuff the longer we're married. So the longer we're married, the more likely we are to take things for granted, and the longer we're married, the more likely we are to notice the things that you thought by now would be fixed, and they're not, right? And so nothing destroys emotional intimacy in a marriage more quickly than criticism. Because criticism is a form of shame. And where there's shame, there's no vulnerability. Where there's shame, someone knows I can't be honest about struggles or challenges. And so when we criticize, we destroy it. Encouragement and appreciation breathes life, but the criticism brings death, brings separation. Proverbs 27:15-16 says, a nagging spouse is like the drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet. You can't turn it off and can't get away from it. I use the Message paraphrasing this because it takes the gender out of it, just a spouse. Like when Solomon said this, he said wife, nagging wife. But you know why? Because he's a husband, right? It's not because husbands don't criticize. You know that, right? Like a nagging spouse, a nagging wife, there's a lot of nagging husbands. It's not just a wife thing, that's a husband thing. That's a husband thing too. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It tears down, it causes a separation, but on top of that, it doesn't work. It doesn't bring about the change you were hoping for. It instead creates this passive-aggressive spirit where they end up doing more of the thing you don't want them to do. Amy Sutherland wrote an article about this for the New York Times called What Shamu Taught Me About a Happy Marriage. And she explains that after 12 years of marriage, she was dismayed that her husband still had all these irritating habits. She thought by now he would have figured it out. She writes, like many wives before me, I ignored a library of advice books and set about improving him. By nagging, of course, which only made his behavior worse. He'd drive faster instead of slower, shave less frequently, not more, leave his reeking workout clothes on the bedroom floor longer than ever. But she says, a breakthrough came when she was researching a book she was writing on exotic animal trainers. I listened, she said, as professional trainers explained how they taught dolphins to flip and elephants to paint. If they can teach elephants to paint, then surely I can teach my husband to do some things differently. She says, it became clear to me that the same techniques might work on that stubborn but lovable species, the American husband. The central lesson I learned from the exotic animal trainers is that I should reward behavior I want repeated, and I should ignore behavior I don't. So I began thanking him if he threw one dirty shirt into the hamper. If he threw in two, I'd give him a kiss. Meanwhile, I would step over the soiled clothes on the floor without one sharp word, though I did sometimes kick them under the bed. But as he basked in my appreciation, the piles became smaller. Now here's the point of that. She recognized this isn't working. I've been trying to do it this way for a long time, and it hasn't worked. What if I tried something different? What if I started to be generous with appreciation? What if I started to be intentional with recognition? And I'm sure she could have said, well, he's a grown man. He should do these things. He shouldn't have to. It shouldn't be based on me noticing it and me appreciating it. Look, what works? That's the question. And so the challenge for us is that we reflect the grace and the encouragement that we've received from God, that we received from one another here. We reflect that in our marriages. You try it the next few weeks. Just see what happens. One more way we can be emotionally generous is through acceptance. It's through acceptance. And I think this is key. And we'll talk more about this in week 4 when we talk about grace and just learning to see each other differently. And instead of looking at someone and noticing the bad things, instead of looking at someone and assuming the worst explanation, how do we accept them while still encouraging them to be who God has made them to be? How do we do that? But I know down deep what all of us want is this kind of love. We want to be accepted. Genesis chapter 2, verse 25 says, Adam and Eve were both naked and they felt no shame. They were accepting. They were fully exposed, fully seen, fully known, naked, but they felt no shame. And emotionally, not just physically, emotionally, I think that's what we are desperate for in marriage. For someone to see me and see all my flaws, see every area where I need to grow, and be accepting of me. I think that's how we want to love. I think it's how we want to be loved. So how do we grow in that kind of acceptance? How do we become more generous with acceptance? Romans 15, verse 7, therefore, accept each other just as Christ has accepted you, so that God will be given glory. The way that we find that kind of acceptance in our heart for the person we've been married to for a long time, maybe know everything about them that's hard to accept. Like, how do we do it? It's by living in the grace of God that accepts us for who we are. Now, I'll just push pause on this. I'll talk more about this next week. I just want to say, don't you dare weaponize this. Like, don't you dare do that. Don't you go home and you say to your spouse, see, this is what's wrong with you. You don't accept me. And you just need to accept the way I treat you, and you just need to accept the way I talk to you, and you just need, no, that's not how this works. That's you not accepting their unacceptance. Like, that's not how it plays out. But when we fully understand, or more fully understand, God's grace and acceptance of us, it fills us with that towards other people, especially our spouse. The more in tune you are with God's acceptance, the more acceptance you will give. But look, conversely, the more shame you feel, the more rejection you feel from God, the more convinced you are that he doesn't want to have anything to do with you, and the best thing you can do is hide from him, the more that marks your life, the less accepting of a person you're gonna be. You won't accept other people, you won't accept your spouse because you feel rejected. And so how do we experience that kind of acceptance? It's through Jesus. It's through Christ. You don't have to come to God cleaned up and without fault, that he loves you as you are, and then he helps grow you. He sanctifies you to become more and more like Jesus along the way. So it's acceptance. One of the ways that you can express your generous acceptance of your spouse is through what's called emotional validation. And that's just where you acknowledge the other person's emotions or feelings without telling them that there's something wrong with them, without making them feel less than for what they're going through. I'll just tell you, like, early on in marriage, yes, but even now, like, this is something I have to resist. I like to fix things. I like to make things better. If I know how to do it differently, then why wouldn't I want to share that? And so what I did, especially early in marriage, my wife would trust me enough to tell me, and no one else, but just tell me how she was feeling about something. If she was sad, I didn't want her to be sad. And so in my mind, my naive mind, the best thing to do would be to say, well, here's all the reasons you shouldn't feel the way you're feeling. Here's what's wrong with you for feeling that way. Instead, let me give you 3 reasons you should feel happy. And what that communicates to her, what that communicates to your spouse is, don't share those things with me. Don't tell me those things. It's not safe. I'll just try and tell you something different. I'll just try and tell you, here's how you should feel. Here's what's wrong. Now look, if you would have asked me, I would have said, I love my wife. Love her more than I love myself. I don't like when I hear her talk about being sad, I don't want her to feel that way. And so how do we then love in a way that accepts, encourage, lead them through, pray for them and bless them? It's all about understanding how God has accepted us. There's an old marriage illustration. It's been around a long time. It's to picture a triangle, At the top of the triangle, you picture the cross representing Jesus, and the two corners of the triangle, it's a husband and wife. And the idea is really quite simple, that the closer a husband and a wife draw to Jesus, the closer they'll draw to one another, that the most effective way to experience this one flesh intimacy is by a husband and wife both drawing closer to Christ. And I just believe that this is really true. That as you draw closer to Jesus and you understand his acceptance, then you have acceptance to give. As you understand his grace, you have grace to give. As you understand his unconditional love, you understand that you have unconditional love to offer. It's how it works. There's something powerful about when a husband and wife will spiritually pursue Jesus together. The Institute for Family Studies says researchers have found that prayer in a marriage relationship, the gravitational pull, will bring in positive outcomes like forgiveness and trust and unity and decreased infidelity and increased relationship satisfaction and commitment. And this is especially true when couples pray for one another. The National Association of Marriage Enhancement showed that the divorce rate among couples who pray together regularly is 1 out of 1,152. It's way less than 1%. And so why is that though? Well, if you do this, you understand. Because it's difficult. It's difficult. My wife knows everything about me, and so for me to pray with her, feels humbling. Like I have to trust that she accepts me to do that. For me to let her listen in on my confession to God, when I say to God, God, I'm sorry for the way I responded. I recognize, God, that I wasn't just responding to her. It wasn't just her that I sinned against. I sinned against you when I treated her that way. Like, man, my pride in me doesn't want to say that in front of her. When I pray for her and I say, God, would you please bless my wife in these ways? And here's the things that she's dealing, and she listens to me talk to God on her behalf. And she feels seen, and she feels heard and valued. Like there's just something about that. It just requires this level of vulnerability. And so it's difficult, it's challenging, but it is profound in how it bonds a couple together. So I'd love to challenge you with that, but even if that's a little too much for you, would you just begin this week praying for your spouse, even if it's just by yourself? And you just begin praying, God, I pray that you would bless my husband today. God, I pray that you would give me words to encourage my wife today. God, I pray that today when I come home from work, that you would give me the emotional strength I need to be fully present in that conversation. God, I pray that you would give me a desire for my spouse today. I just don't feel much. Would you give me a desire? Would you help me to be generous in my love for my spouse? God, would you just show me how you have loved me so that I can be that way with my husband or with my wife? Like if you just begin to pray those prayers, it'll have an impact. It's hard. Because as you start praying, you'll think to yourself, well, I wonder if they're praying this for me. I wonder if they're praying, I'm praying blessings over them. He's not praying, I guarantee you, he's not praying blessings over me. It's what it means to be generous. That you're not doing it with expectation. You're doing it as a reflection of the gospel, what God has done for you through Christ. Gottman talks about the masters and disasters. He says turning away or turning towards. That turning towards language is helpful because that's the same language that's used of how God looks at us because of Jesus. Our sin would cause him to turn away. He can't look at sin. But because of Jesus, there's grace and he turns towards us, the God of the universe. So there's that blessing expressed in the Old Testament book of Numbers, that God would turn his face towards us. He would protect us, give us peace. And I just want to sing that. I just want to pray that as a church, because I know that when we receive it from him, we'll have it to give. So we're gonna sing this song of blessing. I wanna sing it over the marriages in this church, over the 300 couples who signed up. I wanna sing this song of blessing over you. If you're here with your spouse, I want you to sing this song of blessing with them in mind. You're just praying God's blessing over them, and the more we receive, the more we'll have to give. And then if you want to talk to someone about your relationship with Jesus, you can do that by going to our next step room. There's nothing better you can do for your marriage or for any relationship that you're struggling with right now than to get that one relationship, the most important relationship, right.